The first time I saw her was out there in the desert, where the land stretched so far and dry you could swear it never ended. The air smelled of dust and old wood, and the sun burned everything into the same shade of gold. Folks around here didn't waste time on kindness. They liked their jokes rough, their whiskey strong, and their cruelty quiet but sharp. So when they pushed that woman toward me and said she was mine, I knew right away it wasn't out of goodwill. It was a trick, a cruel little show to see how I would squirm. She wore a red dress, the kind of fabric that looked strange against the cracked earth and the sagging houses. She didn't speak a word at first, just looked at me with eyes that had seen too much and said nothing. I expected her to turn back, to run to the people who shoved her forward, but instead she dropped down and clung to my leg like I was the only thing standing between her and death. I felt the weight of her hands on me, the desperation in her grip, and just like that, all the laughter around us grew louder. They didn't care about her, and they sure didn't care about me. To them, it was entertainment, a joke to kill the boredom of another empty day. I had seen men laugh like that before, back when I worked the cattle trails. Men get mean when the land gives them nothing but hunger and heat. They find something weaker, something different, and they throw it into the center like a bone to a pack of dogs. That was all she was to them, a way to pass the evening, a story they could spit out later when the bottle came around. But she wasn't laughing. She wouldn't even let go. Her dress was torn at the hem, her face smudged with dirt, yet she carried herself with a kind of quiet defiance. She was trembling, but not from fear the way you'd expect. It was something else. I couldn't place it, not yet. The others shouted, telling me to drag her off, to push her back, to let her know the joke was on me. But when I looked down, I saw her knuckles white against my jeans, her head pressed against my thigh like she'd found her anchor. I tried to shake her free, but the harder I pulled, the tighter she held. It wasn't weakness, it was survival. And that's when I realized, whether I wanted it or not, she wasn't about to leave my side. In those days, strangers weren't welcomed. A man could get himself shot for less than bringing a woman no one wanted into town. The saloon crowd was already circling, waiting for me to make a fool of myself. The desert didn't forgive mistakes, and neither did these men. I thought about walking away, letting her fend for herself, because the truth is, I had enough trouble carrying my own burdens. But her grip had a strange power to it. It wasn't just hands on my leg, it was as if she had chained herself to my very bones. I bent down to tell her something, to whisper that she'd better let go before this turned uglier, but when her eyes met mine, I lost my words. There was no begging in them, no pleading, only fire. As though she'd chosen me, not out of chance, but out of will. She had decided I was her safe place, whether I liked it or not. And something about that burned through the laughter echoing around me. For the first time in a long while, I felt the weight of another soul pressing into mine. It scared me more than I cared to admit. The desert breeze picked up, carrying the sound of an old windmill creaking in the distance. Behind us, the shack stood leaning and forgotten, its boards rattling like old bones. The crowd was losing patience. They wanted a show, and if I didn't give it to them, they'd make sure the both of us paid the price. I could feel their eyes digging into my back, daring me to shove her off, daring me to prove I was no different than the rest of them. But I couldn't. Something had shifted the moment she touched me, and I knew deep down there was no going back. I reached for her wrist, trying once more to peel her away, but her nails dug into my skin like claws. She shook her head, slow and deliberate, and whispered the first words I'd heard from her lips. They were soft, broken with accent, but clear enough to send a chill crawling up my spine. Don't let them take me. Just 5 words, and everything around me seemed to fall silent. The laughter dulled, the shouts faded, and even the wind seemed to hold its breath. The men didn't like silence. Silence meant the joke was slipping away. I could hear boots shifting in the sand, the clink of spurs, the uneasy shuffle of those who wanted blood instead of boredom. I didn't know who this woman was, where she had come from, or why fate had dropped her at my feet. All I knew was that now I stood between her and a mob of men who didn't see her as human. And the cruelest part of it all was that I still hadn't decided what kind of man I was going to be. I wanted to tell myself she was just another burden, that if I cut her loose, I could go back to my lonely cabin, my quiet life, my way of keeping out of the messes that swallowed other men whole. But deep down I knew it wasn't true. The second she clung to me, her fate tangled with mine like roots in the desert soil. No amount of shaking or pulling was going to change that. The only choice left was whether I would stand with her, walk away. As the sun sank lower, the sky painted itself in shades of fire, casting long shadows over the cracked earth. The men grew restless, some reaching for their belts, others spitting into the dirt like a warning. The woman's breath was ragged against my leg, but her grip never loosened. I could feel the heat of her fear, but also the strength behind it. She had chosen me, not the crowd, not the dust, not the nothingness that waited for her if I stepped aside. I swallowed hard, the weight of their eyes pressing down on me, and finally straightened. My hand rested on her shoulder, steadying her. I didn't know what words were about to come out of my mouth, and I didn't know if I'd live long enough to regret them. But one thing was certain, the joke had gone too far, and now it was on all of us. And just as I opened my mouth to speak, one of the men stepped forward, his shadow stretching across the sand toward us. He wasn't laughing anymore. None of them were. They were waiting, silent and ready, to see what I would do. Would I shove her off and let the crowd have their fun? Or would I draw a line in the dirt, knowing full well the desert doesn't forgive men who stand alone? The answer hung in the air, thick and heavy. As the night began to creep over the horizon, the man who stepped forward was bigger than the rest, his shoulders wide and his hat pulled low over his brow. The sun caught on the iron hanging from his hip, and I knew he wasn't the sort who bluffed. He stopped a few feet away, his boots sinking into the sand, and spat a long stream into the dirt. The crowd shifted behind him, like wolves waiting for their lead to make the first move. The woman still clung to my leg, her breath fast and uneven, though her grip never weakened. I could feel the tremor in her body, but I could also feel the stubborn will beneath it. She wasn't going to let go, not even if I begged her to. The man studied me in silence, his eyes sharp and measuring. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and steady, carrying through the dry air. "You gonna claim her or not?" he asked. The words weren't a question. They were a test, a dare. He wanted me to say no, to shove her away and step back, to let the see him. Crowd have their joke, and I knew if I didn't give them what they wanted, there would be consequences. Trouble had a way of sticking to me, but this felt different. This felt like a storm that wouldn't blow over once the whiskey wore off. I looked down at the woman. She was staring at the ground, her face hidden behind strands of black hair. Her hands dug into me like she was bracing herself for what was coming, and I realized she wasn't waiting for me to save her. She already knew no one else here would. Maybe she had been through this before. Maybe she had been pushed from one cruel hand to another until there was nothing left to cling to but chance. And now chance had brought her to me. I didn't know whether to curse it or thank it. The man stepped closer. "We don't got all night," he said. His hand hovered near his gun, not drawn but close enough to make his meaning clear. The others were muttering now, some laughing again, some urging him on. The heat between us was thick, pressing against my chest. Every instinct told me to walk away, to let go before it was too late. But when I shifted my weight, she tightened her grip and whispered again, soft and fierce, "Don't let them take me." Those words sat heavy in my chest. I thought about the times I had chosen silence over standing up. Times when I turned my back and walked away from someone else's fight, convincing myself it wasn't mine to bear. Out here, a man survived by minding his own. But now, with her clinging to me and a dozen pairs of eyes waiting for me to stumble, I couldn't shake the feeling that if I left her, I'd never outrun the weight of it. Some burdens stay with a man forever, no matter how fast he rides. I cleared my throat, though my voice came out rough. "She stays with me," I said. The words surprised even me. They hung in the air like gunpowder smoke, thick and dangerous. The crowd went quiet. The laughter cut off sharp. The woman looked up for the first time, her eyes locking with mine. There was no relief in them, only a kind of recognition, like she had known I would say it all along. The man's jaw tightened. He didn't move right away, just stood there measuring me, weighing the fight in his mind. The desert has a way of boiling a man's patience down to nothing, and I could see the edges of his temper catching fire. But instead of drawing, he gave a slow grin, wide and humorless. "Suit yourself," he said. Then he turned to the others, spitting again into the dirt. "Let's see how long he keeps her." The crowd broke into scattered laughter, but it was different this time. Not the belly-deep kind, but sharper, meaner. The kind that follows a man long after the sound fades. I knew what it meant. They weren't finished with me. Not by a long shot. And as they drifted back toward the saloon, their voices carried in the wind, low and mocking. I realized I had just painted a target on my back without even knowing why. When the last of them disappeared, I tried once more to free myself from her grip, but she wouldn't budge. "You can let go now," I muttered. But she only shook her head. I sighed and looked around at the empty street, the sagging shack, the endless stretch of cactus and sand. I didn't even know her name, and already she had thrown my life off its rails. I finally crouched down so we were eye level. Her face was thin, her cheekbones sharp, and her lips cracked from the dry air. But her eyes were alive, dark and bright, with something I couldn't name. "Who are you?" I asked. She hesitated, searching my face like she wasn't sure if I deserved an answer. At last she whispered, "I belong to no one." The words carried a weight heavier than the desert itself. She hadn't told me her name, but she had told me enough. That night I led her away from town, back toward the cabin I kept on the edge of nowhere. She walked close behind, her steps uneven but determined. Every so often I glanced back, half expecting her to vanish into the night, but she never did. She followed like her life depended on it, and maybe it did. The moon lit the desert silver, the air cooling just enough to breathe. I didn't speak, and neither did she. The silence between us was thick, but it wasn't empty. It was filled with the echo of that moment in town, the laughter, the threat. The choice I had made without thinking. By the time we reached the cabin, the night had deepened into quiet stillness. The old boards creaked as I pushed the door open, and the smell of dust and wood smoke greeted us. She stepped inside without hesitation, her eyes scanning the single room like she was memorizing it. I set down my hat, lit the lamp, and leaned against the table, watching her. She didn't ask for food or water or rest. She only stood there, her hands still trembling slightly, her eyes fixed on the floor. I wanted to demand answers. To know who had pushed her into that crowd, why they thought it was funny, and why she had clung to me as if I was her last chance. But the question stuck in my throat. Instead, I poured a cup of water and slid it across the table. She took it with both hands, sipped slowly, and then looked at me over the rim. For the first time, I thought I saw the faintest trace of gratitude. Or maybe it was something else, something more complicated. The lamp flickered, throwing shadows across the walls, and for a moment I felt the weight of what I had done settle onto me. By claiming her in front of that crowd, I hadn't just taken her in. I had crossed a line, one that couldn't be stepped back over. Out here, everything spread like wildfire, rumors, grudges, vengeance. And the fire was already burning. She set the cup down and spoke again, her voice low but steady. "They will come," she said. Her accent curled around the words, but her meaning was clear. I didn't ask who she meant. I already knew. The men from the saloon, the ones who had laughed at my expense, the one who had tested me with his hand. On his gun, they weren't finished. They would come looking, and when they did, I'd have to decide just how far I was willing to go for someone I didn't know. I looked at her across the dim room, the desert wind rattling the window behind me. She wasn't trembling anymore. Her back was straight, her chin lifted, her eyes sharp. Whatever fear she carried, it hadn't broken her. If anything, it had sharpened her like steel drawn against stone. She wasn't just a victim of their cruelty. She was something else, something they hadn't counted on when they shoved her toward me. And now she was here, in my cabin, tied to me in ways neither of us understood. The desert was quiet, but I could feel it pressing in, heavy with unspoken threats and the promise of trouble. The night stretched long, and I knew sleep wouldn't come easy. She sat near the fire, her face caught in the glow, while I sat at the table, staring at the door as though it might burst open at any moment. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, only that it would test us both. And as the silence deepened, I realized the cruelest joke of all might not have been the one they played on me. It might be the one fate was playing on both of us, binding two strangers together in the heart of a land that devoured the weak. And somewhere in the distance, carried faint on the wind, I thought I heard the sound of laughter again. Not the bay kind you share with friends, but the kind that means someone is waiting, watching, and ready to strike when the time is right. Morning came in shades of ash and copper, and with it the cold that sneaks up on a man after a desert night. I had not slept. I kept the fire small and the door barred with a plank, and every creak of the boards sounded like a boot step. The woman sat on the floor near the hearth with her knees tucked beneath a torn red dress. She did not cling to me now. She watched the door the same way I did, quiet and alert, as if she could feel danger moving somewhere out in the sage. When I pushed a cup of coffee toward her, she took it with both hands. Her fingers were nicked and raw, marks of hard travel. She studied the steam like she was trying to read it. I asked if she could tell me more. Not everything, just enough to know what kind of trouble was behind her. She chose each word with care. Men brought her across the mountains on a freight wagon, she said. There had been talk of work in a house near the rail camp, then talk changed to something else, something she would not repeat. She ran when they stopped to water the teams. She kept running until the land opened into the wide flats, and when they caught up, they shoved her toward the saloon crowd to make a show of it. They thought no one would stand in the way. That was the joke. I asked if those men worked for the rail boss. She shook her head. Private hands, hired for dirty jobs. She remembered a mark burned into a crate, a circle with a notch missing, like a bitten coin. She traced it on the table with a wet fingertip. That small shape felt heavier than any name. A brand means ownership on the cattle trail. On a crate, it means something worse. By noon I had a plan, though calling it a plan would give it more bones than it had. I meant to lead her across the dry wash toward the ridge where the yucca grows thick, then cut north along the old cattle run to a spring I knew. We could hide there a day or two while I figured whether to take her toward the rail camp where her countrymen worked, or right out to the far ranch and see if an old friend would help. Either way, I had to go back to town first for supplies. There is no mercy in the desert for the unprepared. She stood when I stood, ready as if she had been waiting for that one simple word. Before we left, she untied a thin cord at her waist and pulled loose a strip from the torn hem of her dress. It was not decoration. Something had been stitched inside. She worked the thread with steady hands and slid out a sliver of paper, soft as old leaf. On it was a drawing done in tight characters, then beside those characters a rough map, a line of hills, an X near a crooked arroyo. She caught my look and held the paper near the flame just long enough to warm it, then tucked it deep into the lining again. That was when I understood. She had not clung to me because I was the first man she saw. She had clung to me because she was carrying something someone else would kill to recover, and because I had been stubborn enough to say she could stay. We moved at first light toward town. I kept to the cottonwoods along the wash, staying out of open ground. The main street was quiet the way streets are in the hour before heat takes hold. The burro hitched outside the supply store flicked flies with its tail. I left her hidden in a stand of broomweed and crossed to the door, head down, hat low. Inside, the shop smelled of leather and old grain. The clerk looked me over. He had the slow, doubtful eyes of a man who counts bullets when he sells them. I took flour, jerky, a coil of rope, and a tin of salve for the cuts on her hands. I kept my back to the room and my ears open. When the clerk went to fetch the salve, the bell on the door gave a soft ring. I did not turn. I saw the new shadow stretch along the floor and knew by the weight of the step who it was. The big man from the night before stopped beside the barrel of nails and admired them like he meant to buy a bucket of trouble. He spoke without looking at me. Said the town had a way of chewing up men who stuck their noses in other folks' business. Said a stranger ought to let the wind pass through him, not plant his boots and try to hold it back. The clerk came back with the tin and set it down gentle, as if he did not want to be part of any of this. I paid and picked up the sack. The big man smiled at the window, not at me. Then he set a small coin on the counter. It was round with a vasmas was revimus. It was round with a vangosam bite missing from the edge. A brand cast in brass dot. I walked out slow. The air felt heavier than the sky. Back in the weeds, the woman waited with her eyes on the street. I did not show her the coin. I only said we had to move faster than I planned. We cut east along the wash and around the backs of the sheds. I meant to reach the ridge by sundown, but the desert had other ideas. A dust haze was building beyond the flats, and it carried the thin shapes of riders. I counted 4, then 6. They were not coming full speed, which told me they were not sure where we had gone, yet. I pushed us north until the ground grew broken and the prickly pear gave us cover. Then we settled in under a ledge and listened. A rattler buzzed somewhere. In the rocks, the woman did not flinch. She had the stillness of someone who learned early that calm can hide you better than any wall. When the riders reached the wash, they split. 3 kept to the bottom and 3 worked the higher line where our prints might show. I watched the one in front. He had a band of cloth tied around his wrist, same color as the coin. He studied the ground and pointed once, then twice, and I knew he had a nose for sign. We could not sit tight and hope. We had to give them a trail bolder than the one we wanted to keep. So I handed the woman my canteen, told her to sip, and slid down the rock, making sure my boots scuffed loud against the grit. I circled toward the arroyo and found a thin game path. There I dragged a mesquite branch across the sand and laid it down like a mark, as if we had turned up the path in haste. When I crawled back, the woman touched my sleeve. Her eyes asked what I was doing. I whispered that when men hunt, they trust their own certainty more than the land. Give them a mark in the direction you want them to believe, and they will follow it because it makes them feel right. It worked. For a time. The riders chose the false path and moved west toward the shallow hills, and I took her east along the backside of the ridge to the spring. The spring was only a damp seam under cotton roots, but to the desert it was a treasure. I filled the canteen and washed grit from the cuts on her hands. She watched the water with a look I recognized. Not joy, not gratitude. Relief edged with fear, because relief never lasts long out here. While she rested, I searched the ground. For any old signs, the spring had been used by others. I found a char circle from a small fire and a scrap of paper half buried in dirt. It had those tight characters again and the faint sketch of the same crooked arroyo marked on her hidden map. Someone had waited here once. Someone who knew the same signs she knew. All this time I kept a second worry inside me. One of those small private worries a man does not speak because saying it makes it grow. It concerned the deputy. He had been quiet last night, hanging back, while the big man did the talking. The deputy is the kind of man who knows the cost of every decision and makes the ones that keep him alive. I had known him years back when we both worked the cattle run. He used to say the desert rewards men who mind the wind. If he came looking, it would not be with noise. Toward evening, as the sky went pale and the edges of the world softened, a figure appeared on the rim above the spring. He moved like a man who knew how to move. I reached for my rifle and raised it slow. He raised a hand empty of steel. The woman stayed behind me but did not cower. The figure slid down the rocks and came into the light. It was the deputy. He did not take his hat off. He looked at the woman, then at me. He said he did not come to fetch anyone, not yet. He said the big man had a hold on certain parcels of land and certain men in town, and those men liked the kind of coin with a bite missing. He said a freight wagon had come through 3 nights back and stopped behind the old mill, and he had looked the other way because each man has to weigh his own fear. Now he could not quite swallow the taste of it. He asked what marks we had. Seen, and I told him about the bitten coin and the map sewn into cloth. His jaw tightened when I said map. He asked to see it, and the woman shook her head. He respected the answer. The deputy brought word that there was talk of a line carved into the hills north of us. Not a rail line. A hidden line, meant for moving goods no one wanted listed. The mark on the coin belonged to a trader who had lost something precious from one of those wagons. Precious to him, not to the world. The deputy said men who work under that coin have no patience, and patience is all that keeps a town from falling apart. He warned that a posse would soon form, not under law but under the coin. When it did, the spring would no longer be safe. He left a small bundle wrapped in cloth. Dried meat, cartridges, a folded scrap of paper from the jail ledger where he had traced 3 sets of initials and a date. The date matched the wagon's arrival. He could not do more without painting his own target. He climbed back to the ridge and vanished into the gray light like a ghost who had made an uneasy peace with his sins. When night came, the woman sat beside the tiny fire and finally spoke more than a few words. She told me in simple pieces about a village near water and rice fields, about a father who carved letters on wood, about a journey that was supposed to end with honest work boiling clothes and sweeping floors. She did not paint herself as helpless. She spoke of learning to count the time by stars because the men who guarded the wagons hid the sun with canvas. She had learned to listen when they thought she did not understand. She heard one speak of a ledger, of crates that were not meant to open in daylight, of a partner who had backed out and who now owed a debt. She remembered the crooked arroyo because she watched one man draw it and tuck the drawing into a book. Later, when another guard slept, she found the book and tore the page loose with careful fingers. She kept it hidden inside her dress until the chance to run came like lightning. She was not sure where the X on the map led, only that the man who owned the bitten coin cared more about it than he cared about her life. Maybe it marked a stash that was never picked up. Maybe it marked a witness. Whatever it was worth more to him than the town, and that kind of worth breeds violence. I asked why she clung to me instead of to the other faces in the crowd. She said I did not laugh. Simple as that. I wanted to argue that there were a dozen men who had not laughed, but I knew the truth. Not laughing is not the same as standing still. That was what she had seen, and that was what bound us. We set watches and slept in turns. Sometime near dawn, while the world was gray and the birds were not yet brave, I woke to the sound of a pebble clicking on the rock shelf above us. I held my breath and listened again. Another click, then a soft slide. I looked to the woman, and she was already awake, her eyes reflecting the ember glow. I motioned her to the far side of the spring, and she moved, quick and silent. The shadow of a man broke along the rim, not the deputy. Too heavy in the shoulders, too careless with his weight. He eased down, looking past the cotton roots, not seeing us yet. A second shadow came behind him, and then a third. I lifted the rifle and felt the old calm settle over me, the kind that lives in a man who has spent years in places where mercy often arrives too late. I did not fire, not yet. The first man stepped into the frame of the ledge, and I saw the band of cloth on his wrist. The coin men had found our water. I breathed through my nose and counted the shapes. 3 here, more likely behind. The woman reached for the small knife I had given her, not as if she meant to use it, but as if holding it steadied her. The first man crouched to touch the damp soil near the spring, then lifted his fingers to his tongue. He smiled. He whistled once, a low call, and another shape answered from the dark. The spring had given us one night. Now it gave us a choice: run and leave a trail, or stand and risk being pinned. The woman looked at me, and I looked at the map hidden in her dress and all the things it meant. The horizon was still without color, the edge of the world thin as paper. Somewhere behind us the crooked arroyo waited, and somewhere ahead the coin men were closing a circle we did not yet understand. Made my decision, but before I could speak it, a fourth figure appeared at the rim, then a fifth. The fifth held something long against his shoulder, not a rifle. A staff. He wore a scarf over his lower face, and his hat was slouched low. He raised the staff and pointed it toward the east, then swept it south, giving a signal the others obeyed. Without question. The coin men shifted like a school of fish, the pattern of their search changing in front of us, and the new line angled right toward our ledge. The woman's hand tightened on the knife. I slid my thumb along the rifle's worn stock and felt the old scars there. The day was about to break, and with it the fragile cover of night. I thought of the map, the crate brand, the missing ledger page, the deputy's ledger marks, and the laughter in the saloon that felt like a promise. The spring whispered under the roots, and the first coin man turned his head at the sound, eyes narrowing. He took one step toward the cotton roots. Before his boot lifted for the second, we moved. Where and how we moved would set the course for everything that came next, for the woman who clung to me and for the long shadow of the bitten coin. And as we slipped into the rocks, the sky finally broke into that hard desert light that shows every truth a man would rather leave buried. The air thinned with the first light, and I could hear every grain of sand shift under the boots of the coin men above us. Their voices were low, hushed in that way men speak when they know violence is near. The woman pressed against the rocks, eyes steady but wide, clutching the knife like it was the last tie to survival. I kept my rifle close, the weight of it both comfort and burden. Every instinct told me to run, but running meant leaving a trail they would follow until we had no ground left. Standing meant drawing blood before the sun was fully risen, and once blood was spilled, there would be no turning back. The man at the spring bent lower, touching the damp earth with greedy hands. His smile was not joy but hunger, as if water itself was proof of us. He motioned with 2 fingers, and another shadow shifted along the ridge. They were circling. My jaw tightened. I thought of the deputy's warning, of the ledger scraps, of that bitten coin lying heavy in my pocket. Every sign pointed to this moment, to the circle closing. The woman breathed slow, watching me, waiting to follow whatever choice I made. She trusted me with her life, though I wasn't sure I trusted myself with it. I motioned for her to move left, keeping low. The spring behind us murmured. It sounded louder now because danger makes even the smallest noise echo like a drum. The coin man crouched, listening. His head turned just enough to catch the glint of dawn against the rock. He was looking straight toward us. My finger brushed the trigger. I stopped myself. One shot too early and we'd be overrun before the echo faded. I needed them closer, where the land could work for us. She slid along the ledge, silent as smoke. And I followed. Each step felt carved into my nerves. A pebble fell from my boot and rattled down. The man froze. He lifted his hand, palm open, and a whistle carried across the ridge. 3 more shadows appeared. They were not searching now. They were closing in. I could see the cloth bands on their wrists, the faint glimmer of brass coins tied to them. That mark bound them tighter than blood. The woman touched my sleeve. Her lips moved with no sound, shaping the words "not here." She was right. The spring had given us cover, but it was also a trap. I nodded and pointed toward the jagged slope where the rocks cut sharp into a narrow chute. If we could reach that choke, their numbers would matter less. I eased back, pulling her with me, every muscle begging for speed while my mind forced me to crawl. The rifle stayed in my hands, aimed but still. Sweat slid into my eyes, stinging, blurring the edges of the men above. Then the 5th figure moved. The one with the staff. He had not joined the circle until now, but when he stepped forward, the others paused as if waiting for him. He raised the staff, pointed toward the east, then swung it in a wide arc to the south. His command shifted them like cattle under a whip. They angled straight for the chute I had chosen. He knew the land. He knew our choices before we made them. My chest tightened. Whoever he was more dangerous than the rest combined. We had no more time. I pulled the woman forward and we broke from cover. The sound of our steps hit the stone, sharp as a gunshot. Shouts rose. Boots scrambled on the ridge. A shot cracked the air and chipped stone near my shoulder. We ran, the chute ahead like a dark throat waiting to swallow us. I shoved her first, then turned to fire once, twice. The shots boomed across the rocks, throwing dust into the air. One man fell back, clutching his arm, but the others pushed harder. Their leader with the staff never flinched. He raised his hand and pointed again, driving them like hounds. The chute narrowed until only one could follow at a time. I jammed the rifle butt against the rock and reloaded, my breath ragged. The woman crouched beside me, clutching her knife. Her face pale but set. We could hold here for a time, but not forever. Their voices echoed down the stone walls, closer with each call. I saw the first shadow appear in the opening, his eyes wild with the hunt. I fired. The sound tore through the gorge, deafening. He fell, and the next pushed over him, undeterred. I fired again. The rocks rang with the blast, but there were too many. The staff-bearer had not moved. He stayed back, calm, watching, waiting for us to spend ourselves. That patience was worse than their shouts. It meant he knew the end would come his way. The woman tugged my arm and pointed higher. A crack in the wall, just wide enough to climb. We scrambled toward it, stones cutting our palms. Behind us, another shot rang, close, whistling past her shoulder. She gasped, but kept climbing. I fired blind into the chute to slow them, the recoil jolting my arm. My boots slipped, but I dragged myself up and shoved her into the crevice. The gap opened into a narrow ledge above, giving us a higher line. We crawled along it, pressed flat to the rock. While the coin men cursed below. From this height, I could see farther east, over the broken ridges toward the crooked arroyo she had spoken of. The land twisted there, a scar carved deep into the earth. The X on her map burned in my mind. Whatever was hidden lay that way. but between us and that place stretched open ground and men who hunted like wolves. The tension knotted my chest. Each choice carried weight that could not be undone. The staff-bearer raised his head and spotted us. Even at this distance, I felt the weight of his gaze. He lifted the staff and tapped it twice on the stone. His men shifted again, breaking from the chute to climb around the slope, cutting off our path. He was shaping the chase, forcing us where he wanted. The woman gripped my sleeve and whispered one word: trap. I knew she was right. Yet the only way left was forward, toward the arroyo. The place marked on her secret map might hold answers or ruin, but it was all we had. We moved fast along the ledge, the ground crumbling under our boots. Dust rose in choking clouds. Behind us, the coin men scrambled higher, their shouts bouncing off the stone. My throat burned with each breath. The woman stumbled once, nearly falling, and I caught her wrist. Her pulse beat hard, steady with fear and resolve. We pressed on until the ledge opened onto a slope of shale. We slid down, stones skittering ahead of us, and landed hard in a dry, washed-out silence followed for a breath, broken only by the wind. Then a whistle carried down. They had found our trail again. We ran, the wash twisting toward the arroyo, the map pulling us like a magnet. My lungs screamed. Her dress caught on thorn and tore further, but she did not slow. The land opened wider, the sky burning with full daylight. And there, on the horizon, the crooked scar of the arroyo rose against the light. We were close, but so were they. I glanced back. The staff-bearer was on the ridge above, his figure stark against the sun. He raised the staff high, and for a moment the world felt held in that gesture. Then his men broke into a charge, pouring down the slope like a flood. Dust rose behind them, the sound of their boots like thunder on dry earth. The chase was no longer hidden. It was out in the open, raw and relentless. My heart pounded with each step, knowing the climax was near, knowing every choice now was a blade edge. The arroyo waited, and with it the truth that had driven this woman across deserts and into my path. Whatever lay ahead, the storm behind us was closing fast, and there would be no more chances to turn back. The arroyo loomed closer, jagged and dark, its broken walls like a wound in the land. Every stride carried the weight of survival, each breath sharp as fire in my chest. Behind us, the coin men thundered down the slope, their shouts mixing with the pound of boots and the scrape of steel. The woman stayed at my side, her face streaked with dust, her grip on that small knife steady even though her legs shook. She had chosen to trust me, and now we both had to see this through. We reached the edge of the arroyo and the land dropped away beneath us, sheer and cruel. The woman looked down, then back at me, her eyes asking if there was any way forward. The walls fell almost straight, but I saw a narrow trail carved by storms long gone. It wound down like a twisted scar, steep but possible if we risked it. The shouts grew closer. I grabbed her hand and we stepped onto the path, sliding and stumbling as rocks gave way under our weight. The descent tore at our hands and knees. But we made it to the bottom, the cool shadow of the arroyo wrapping around us like a shroud. The place was strange and still. The floor of the gorge was dry, cracked, as if no water had touched it for years. High walls blocked the sun, leaving thin blades of light slashing across the ground. The woman pulled at the torn edge of her dress and revealed the sewn piece of cloth again. She opened it flat, tracing the faint marks with her fingers. The map was not to gold or jewels, but to a hidden cache tucked somewhere within these walls. She pressed her palm to the rock face, searching for the sign she had risked her life to find. The coin men were not far. Their boots echoed above, their voices carrying down. I could hear the staff-bearer's tone, calm and certain. He knew we had nowhere left to run. My rifle was nearly empty, only a few rounds left. The woman looked at me, fear mixing with a strange kind of resolve. She pressed her hand against a slab of stone that bore a faint carved line shaped like that bitten coin. She pushed, and the rock shifted with a groan. A narrow hollow opened behind it. Inside lay bundles wrapped in oilskin, bound tight and heavy. She pulled one free and tore it open. Inside was paper, not treasure. Ledger books, marked with names and numbers. Each page told of shipments, bribes, and murders disguised as trades. The bitten coin was more than a symbol. It was a brand of power and corruption stretching across towns and borders. These books were proof. They were the kind of proof men would kill to keep buried, and the kind of proof that could topple them if it saw the light of day. Her eyes filled with tears as she held the pages, not of fear but of something like relief. She had carried this secret across the desert not for herself, but to expose what they had done. The staff-bearer descended with his men, their shadows crawling down the wall like black spiders. They came slow, confident, blades flashing in the streaks of light. I raised the rifle and fired, the sound blasting through the gorge. One fell, another stumbled, but still they pressed on. My last round rang out, then the rifle clicked empty. I hurled it aside and stood ready with nothing but grit. The woman clutched the ledger, the knife still in her other hand. The staff-bearer reached the bottom at last. His face was older than I expected, worn by years of command. His eyes carried no rage, only certainty. He raised the staff and spoke. With a low voice that carried across the stones, he told her to hand over the book, that her life was worth nothing against the weight of the coin. She stood taller than I had seen before, dust streaking her cheeks, but her chin lifted. She said no. Her voice was small, but it struck like a bell in the silence. The men advanced, and for a moment I thought it was the end. Then from above, another shot cracked, sharp and sudden. Dust burst from the rock near the staff-bearer's feet. A voice shouted down, the deputy's voice, steady and strong. More men appeared on the ridge, lawmen with rifles trained on the coin's followers. The deputy had not abandoned us after all. He had tracked the signs we left and brought help. The staff-bearer's calm faltered, though only for a heartbeat. He looked up at the rifles above, then back at us. He lowered the staff, tapping it once against the ground. His men hesitated. He could order them to charge and die, or he could pull back and live to fight another day. His jaw clenched, but his eyes stayed cold. With a sharp motion, he turned and climbed, his men following. The gorge echoed with their retreat, their shadows shrinking as they fled back to the ridges. The deputy and his men came down slow, rifles ready until they were sure the danger was gone. When he reached us, he looked at the woman with a kind of respect. She handed him one of the ledgers, her hand shaking as she let it go. He opened it, scanning the lines, his face tightening with each page. He knew what this meant. This was not just about one desert town. This was about a network that stretched wider than any of us had guessed. We left the arroyo together, moving carefully up the slope until the land opened again under the bright sun. The coin men were gone, but the weight of their presence lingered in every shadow. The woman walked beside me, no longer clinging but steady on her own. She had carried her secret to its end. The deputy promised her the ledgers would reach the right hands, that the bitten coin would not rule unchecked any longer. She listened, but I could see in her eyes that she knew the fight would never be fully over. Men like that always rise again, in one form or another. As we reached the spring once more, the woman stopped and knelt to wash her face. The dust ran away in dark streams, leaving her features clear for the first time since I met her. She looked younger than I thought, but older in spirit. She turned to me and whispered her name, the first time she had spoken it. It was soft, carried with dignity, and I felt the weight of her trust settle heavier than any burden before. The deputy offered her protection, a place in town until the ledgers were carried east. She agreed, though her eyes kept scanning the horizon as if she expected the staff-bearer to return at any moment. I walked with her to the edge of the settlement, and there she stopped, her hand resting briefly on my arm. No words of farewell, only that small touch, a promise that she remembered. Days later, I heard word that the ledgers had been delivered, that arrests had begun, that the coin's shadow was shrinking. But whispers still carried of men regrouping, of revenge brewing in places unseen. As for the woman, she stayed in town under the deputy's guard, working quietly, her presence both reminder and warning. She had become part of the land, her story etched into its dust and stone. When I finally left, the desert stretched wide before me, the horizon endless. I carried no coin, no map, no promise of riches. What I carried was her trust, the memory of her strength, and the lesson that even the cruelest joke can turn into a bond that reshapes lives. The desert had given me a burden, and I had nearly cursed it. But in the end, it gave me something else entirely, something lasting. The sun dropped low as I rode on, shadows long across the sand. The echoes of pursuit had faded, replaced by the quiet hum of wind over stone. I thought of the staff-bearer, his eyes cold as iron, and knew our paths might cross again someday. But if they did, I would not face him alone. I would face him with the strength of what we had endured, with the memory of a woman who refused to let go, and with the certainty that some fights are worth carrying until the very end. That was the truth the desert carved into me. That was the story I carried forward, plain and human, but enough to last beyond the dust.